2:02, so we're going to get rolling on this. So I'm just going to start by introducing myself. My name is Mark Coombs. I'm the Director of Business Development at Blue Jay Legal. I'm also a lawyer who has worked on the product. So I'm replacing Ben this week. Ben will be back. He's just out of the country right now, and he'll be continuing to do these, but thought I would jump in and lend some thoughts on this topic. So we're dealing with 152 sub-4 assessment periods. My job is generally to go to law firms and accounting firms and talk about the tool, educate them on some of the different aspects, who it's been used by, and kind of go into that. Obviously, feel free to ask questions. I know that you can't directly ask them, but you can write them. I'm happy to address everybody's questions probably towards the end of the session as they pour in. So, I mean, the generalist presentation here, the way this is going to work, I'm going to cover a bunch of different things surrounding our product. I'm not necessarily going to just jump into it right away. Initially, I'm going to cover where our products, this is an AI application, where this actually fits in just in terms of all the other products that exist. Where does this fit in terms of the landscape of legal research tools generally, and then how have we applied AI specifically here? So there are many of applications of AI to legal. It's not just us. What's the application here? What does it do? Then I'm going to go into a little bit about how our current clients are using this. So we have both law firms and accounting firms using this product, as well as other people in the public sector. So how are they making use of this tool? How can you make use of this tool? Why is this interesting if you're joining? I see many more people are joining now. What are the use cases here? If I'm a lawyer at a firm, how do I actually run through this program? How do I work this into my research process? I'm going to answer those questions. The third thing is I'm going to use a live demonstration. So we've taken a recent case, assessment period case, a 152 sub-4 case. Going to run through that together. So go through the facts of that case, and then I'm going to show you specifically how you would use the program to address that. So that's kind of the agenda. In terms of more background, just in case, I mean, some of you regularly join our webinars. For some of you, this might be the very first time. So I'll go through a brief history of the company before I kind of dive in here a little bit further. So we were started in 2015, founded by 3 law professors from the University of Toronto Law School, one of them obviously being Ben Allery, who is our CEO and is the tax law prof at U of T. In 2016, we built a prototype that could tell you whether somebody was an independent contractor or an employee for tax purposes. Ended up partnering with Thomson Reuters. You see that logo on the lower left there. Brought that to market as Tax Foresight at the beginning of 2017. So this product, very new to the income tax realm and to just legal practice generally, as well as accounting firm practice. The beginning of 2017 really was a lot of learning for us. So we only had 6 different issues or so within the product. Expanded that out significantly after talking to accounting firms of all sizes and law firms of all sizes as to what would actually be useful. And now the product has been widely adopted by both the big firms as well as the small firms specifically. And there are different reasons for that, which I'll kind of get into as we go through this. So that's a brief history of the company. I'm going to start rolling through. Again, please go ahead and write your questions. I'll make sure to save some time and get to them all towards the end here as we go through. Okay, so this initial slide, evolution of legal research tools. This is a slide that we always show. It just helps orient your minds around how we're thinking about our products, as well as just the general sense of where AI is. Like, where does AI fit in into legal practice or to your accounting firm practice now that it's around? So we see this initial shift, right? We've got analog to digital. That's just obvious. Everybody knows the analog sphere deals with law libraries. I was just at a firm earlier today. Every single one of them had their Income Tax Act practitioners editions. Still widely used. The book is the most common legal research tool. It always was. It's just that now, ever since the advent of companies like Thomson Reuters, most firms, including small ones, have switched over to digital type tools. These are your TaxNet Pros. These allow you to basically surf through all those library materials, but on your laptop, making everything searchable by keywords. There's a big efficiency gain in switching everything over to the computer. Huge advent in technological revolution. The interesting thing to note, though, was during that shift between analog to digital. And we've done some research into this ourselves because we're part of a new shift. There was a lot of pushback. So it wasn't obvious. It wasn't an obvious switch from analog to digital. A lot of firms actually pushed back. They didn't want to switch primarily because they thought they would lose money on clients. And it's interesting to note that the early adopters tended to be the most successful with their clients ultimately. So there were significant benefits in becoming an early adopter. Now digital tools, so I mean the TaxNet Pros of the world, most accounting firms and law firms, almost all of them have some type of that tool. They're ubiquitous. So it's just kind of obvious at this point that everybody uses those tools. What's really interesting now, since everything's available on your laptop or on your desktop, is that we can actually use algorithms to go through all that material, whether it be case log like us, so that's what we do, whether it be secondary sources or contracts like some other firms do. We can actually surf through all of that and give you really predictions or return really accurate results to you. So that's this next shift now between digital and computational. Everything's available now online. Now we can take all of that stuff, feed it into an algorithm, and get really valuable results that add significant value to the firm specifically. So what we do is we'll take every case in an area. Today we're focusing on reassessment periods. We'll take every case in that area, have our legal team read through them all, structure that data properly. Then our data science team is going to feed it into an algorithm that's going to be able to predict with 90% accuracy or more. That's really our application of AI here. We're not the only people in this space. There are other applications around being able to surf through contracts and flag things faster, being able to have a better natural language search. We're the only ones being able to predict outcomes based on purely legally relevant facts. And I'll show you why that's useful in just a second in terms of your practice. So even if you're a senior practitioner and you tend to predict in these areas pretty well, it's still helpful to have a statistical backing or a statistical analysis on the back end of that. So we'll go into that as well as we run through these. So again, I've kind of touched on this a little bit. How are people using this? So these are kind of three of the main things that we hear from our clients, aside from some other reasons people end up using our products. Just being able to provide the highest possible quality in your advice, that's one. Tends to be, again, senior practitioners, obviously been practicing the area for 20, 30 years, tend to be able to look at a set of facts and be able to predict pretty accurately on those facts. This just allows people who aren't so senior to get the access of somebody who's basically read every decision to kind of almost pull the audience. So if you imagine who wants to be a millionaire, I'm going to ask the audience. You get to ask every judge that's ever decided a case, how likely am I to get an income or capital determination? How likely is somebody to be gross and negligent or not gross and negligent based on the facts? Getting access to this this machine learning brain helps you in terms of leveling up your expertise without necessarily needing to have 20 to 30 years experience. And even for those practitioners, so to go to the second point, validating instincts, even for those practitioners, it's still very helpful to have a sanity check or a secondary check on their initial gut feel. They have access in their minds to most of the cases since they've been around for so long. It's difficult to recall those cases when needed, and it's just helpful to have an algorithm that's trained on every decision backing up your advice. Quantifying risks for clients. So one of the things that's new about our product is we actually give you a percentage behind the prediction. So if somebody's more likely to be gross and negligent, or as we'll see today, have willful neglect or carelessness with 152 sub 4, we'll actually give you a number behind that prediction. What's really useful is being able to go back and look at certain factors. So for example, if somebody's going to be grossly negligent, or the CRA is alleging that they're grossly negligent, everybody knows that if the person has more business experience and more education, it tends to militate in the favor of that person, more likely being grossly negligent in that particular scenario. But how much more likely? Is it 5%? Is it 7% in the specific position? Is it enough to actually flip the result if that was the key argument in the case? Being able to quantify those specific aspects of whatever issue you're dealing with, and not just if you're litigating, but also if you're planning at the outset, extremely valuable to be able to give advice like that. So if I'm planning for a merger and acquisition, I'm looking at the worker classifier, for example. I care about whether people are independent contractors or employees. I might say to my client in the specific case, these 2 or 3 things, so making sure that they're always supervised, making sure that they own the tools when they come to work, that they wear a uniform, those 3 things are going to make sure that you get the determination that you want should this ever come into issue with the CRA later on. So those are the types of insights that you can get. Again, product is helpful both on a tax planning side, so whether you're more in the accounting sphere, or also obviously on the litigation side if you're taking cases to court. And again, we're going to focus more so on the reassessment period aspect, which is a penalty case or a penalty type of case. So more attuned to litigators, although accounting firms do run into this issue too if they are getting reassessed and have to go back to prior years. Okay, so what does our solution do? It's kind of a basic question, split into 2 functions specifically. So we've got the search function and the answer function. I've been talking a lot about the answer function, so what classifiers do. Those are where we've applied machine learning on all the cases. You get a specific prediction about an outcome. Navigators are a little bit different, also an answer function. They just go through the entire regulatory framework and give you a specific answer. One example is our CCA navigator. So what class is this capital cost allowance in? The program asks me 20 to 21 questions about it, and then just automatically classifies it for me. There's no issue around that. The search function is a little bit different. It's something that we specifically built out for our clients that had to do any research with regard to cases. So Case Finder, I've kind of referenced this legal team a little bit, so I'll talk a little bit more about that. We have 12 lawyers on staff, as well as many law students working under them. They go through and structure all these cases. They do a ton of work, honestly. Like if we looked at how many cases would be under the reassessment periods, I'm sure it's a significant amount. They read through every single case. They classify every factor that a judge says is important, which usually leaves us around 40, sometimes to 50 factors that could be important. Structure all of those cases like that. Then it goes to the data science team who ultimately feeds it through the algorithm. And the questions that are left in the program are the ones that the machine learning has flagged as being the most important. So all of that work is basically left up for you to use in the case finder function. You can now go through and just structure and say, I want all the cases with this type of business experience for somebody who used an accountant who is compensated on a contingency fee basis from the past 3 years. Just give me those cases and it'll pull it out for you instantly. Types of issues addressed, so there are many. I'm not necessarily going to go through them all here because it's much better addressed when we actually get into the program. There's a lot of different stuff covered, 25 different issues we're up to now, and it's still expanding. Okay, now on to our accuracy rating. So this is kind of the most controversial and I think is the most interesting point. So we're accurate to 90% with all the new cases that come out, as well as our out-of-sample testing process. So I mean, how can we say that we're 90% accurate? Again, it's because of our detailed out-of-sample testing process. So our lawyers imagining the universe of cases for reassessment period was somewhere around 600 cases. We go through, structure the data for all those cases. We take 70% of the total amount. So we take 420 of those cases, train the algorithm on those, and then show it the other 30% randomly chosen that had never seen before. We're finding that it's getting 90% or more in out-of-sample testing. So that's really interesting from both an academic and a practical standpoint. There are a lot of people out there who think, there's no way you can predict what a court is going to do, but it turns out if you're using really high-end structured data alongside the most advanced statistical methods, so machine learning in this case, you can get really high accuracy. It's an entire process. It's not easy to get there, but we can. We don't release something unless it's 90% accurate on out-of-sample testing, also testing it against new cases that are coming down from the courts. But yeah, this is tends to be the most controversial point, is whether this is even possible in the first place. And it is, and we're doing it on only the legally relevant facts. So we're not asking you who the judge is going to be or who opposing counsel is. Purely on the legally relevant facts, so it's also useful at the tax planning stage, not just in litigation. So you can get a really accurate determination of what the actual answer is, if something's income or capital, or whether somebody's resident or non-resident, without needing to do just a bunch of work and honestly not really having an idea. If you don't use a system like this, even the most experienced practitioners will often not be able to say how confident they are in terms of their advice. They'll say, we have a really strong case, or this looks very likely to be this type of tax determination, but almost impossible to quantify it without using a system. Okay, who are our clients? So 2017, early part of the year, was a listening phase for us. We only had 6 different issues in the product, needed to build it out significantly, talked to a lot of these firms that are now our clients, built out the search functions, built out the analytics functions. Now the product is significantly expanded. And so with that, we've seen really widespread adoption. So, we've got all the big accounting firms on board, most of the national law firms on board. So, the KPMGs, PwCs, Deloitte's of the world are all on board. At this point, it's really moving more so down market. So the mid-market firms, most of those accounting firms are on board too. The smaller accounting firms and the smaller law firms are starting to catch on too. There are some benefits to being an early adopter, particularly in being able to differentiate your services. So most mid-size law firms and accounting firms in tax are very similar. They have senior practitioners who have been working in these areas for a very long time. They have developed that subject matter expertise. But being able to offer services using an AI program is helpful in terms of being able to show your clients that you have something different to offer and can actually help you acquire new clients down the road. So again, just a side note in terms of why people would sign up and why we've had so much success in the latter half of 2017 and now also for 2018. Okay, so we're going to jump right into the main subject in terms of this webinar. 152 sub 4 of the ITA or the ETA, but we're going to focus on the ITA version, at least for today. Is this misrepresentation attributable to neglect or carelessness such that the CRA can reassess past the normal years? So this is a really common, this is a question, if you're dealing with this, you're kind of in danger, something's gone wrong. The CRA is looking back to see if they can assess other years. And so the classifier just deals with purely that issue, and we'll run through our example here. I'm going to leave this up for a few minutes. I'll also speak to it as well. So we're dealing with a really recent case. So it's Mr. Melancon, a CPA, CMA. He ends up not having a great time with the CRA. So it's a shareholder benefit initially. CRA, and then the court ends up adding significant amount of unreported benefits received by him into his tax return. Now they want to reassess and go back to many different prior years. So they want to look at some of the other expenses from his construction work. His defense, obviously, is that he's always acted in good faith. This was an honest mistake. The key here is going to be, at least for the court, it was his knowledge and experience. So the tax court ultimately did find that the CRA had the ability to reassess, so 152.4 was met, so it was by negligence, carelessness, or willful default, fortunately for him. And they found that he misrepresented the facts by failing to declare a benefit in connection with his own residence, the construction of it. So, really important to them was knowledge and experience, and we'll see again, the program does take that into account. It may or may not actually be the most important factor if you run it against all of the data. So, interesting in working on this, courts will often say this was super important, and they'll say going forward, or appellate level court might say these are the most important factors to consider. But actually running the data against all the cases, you can get a quick reveal of what things tend to be really the most important things at the end of the day. Okay, so I'm going to go now into the program. I'm going to share a different part of my screen here just to get this up so everybody can see. Okay, so this is tax foresight. I'm just going to leave it up this way. So this is exactly what you would see if you were a subscriber to the product. This is exactly how it looks. I'm just going to quickly go through the different issues that it covers before we jump into our example. So we've got, you can see everything's kind of grouped under different types of headings. So we've got income or capital type issues. These are tangible, intangible expenditures. They'll tell you whether something's capital or current. Sales of real estate or securities, whether those are income or capital. Sources of income, I've alluded to the worker classification. Windfalls, so whether certain gambling winnings are received as a business or not. Business versus property as rental income. Different types of inclusion, so taxable benefits as a primary beneficiary, and shareholder benefits. Then there are different types of deductions, so deductions for home office, CCA deductions, CCPC status, and interest deductibility as well. Then there are different jurisdictional issues, so whether somebody's resident or non-resident. For individuals, carrying on business and central management control, which is the common law test for corporations as well as trusts. Those are obviously for corporate clients. Then we've got our penalties issues. So gross negligence, 163.2, director's liability under the ITA, ETA, assessment period, which we'll be going through today under the ITA, ETA, and then GAR. So interesting to note about GAR, you'll see with the rest of these modules that there's a classifier, case finder, and case analytics feature. With GAR, there is no classifier feature. So we attempted to build something that could predict GAR cases with a 90% accuracy. We're unable to do that. And so GAR is case finder and case analytics only. So, I mean, as interesting as it is to note things that we can predict with 90% accuracy, it's interesting to note the ones that we can't, at least not yet. GAR in particular, and I can go through this a little bit later, but I want to focus more on assessment periods. Just not enough cases, so many different sections of the Act, so many different types of transactions. The algorithm really didn't have enough observations to be able to predict that with any high level of accuracy. Okay. Elections, so these again are navigators. They'll just go through the statutory framework, give you an answer at the end. Exempt financial services, so classifier, case finder, and case analytics for both of these. These are indirect tax, so we have some functionality there too. So this is what we have so far. Happy to hear input at the end if there's anything that you would like us to build ultimately, but this is currently what's in the program. Now let's go back and focus on our example. So I've just got this saved in the interest of time. Okay. Okay, we're gonna go through this step by step together. So our taxpayer had a university degree, and you can see immediately how this is working as the program's asking us all the key questions. It's gonna then comb through all the cases for us, give us a prediction, an explanation, and then give us all the most similar cases that kind of link to that. How do we, you might be thinking as you kind of see some of these, how do we actually come up with the questions? Again, that's our legal team reading through every single case. They pulled out everything that is relevant, at least that judges say is relevant. So we usually start with this classifier is 18 questions, probably started with 40, culled that down significantly using the machine learning. The ones that are left in here tend to be really important. It's just that they are important in different scenarios. So neural networks are different than traditional statistical models in that they don't, I can't tell you 1.2 is just worth plus or minus 5%. It really has to be taken into account with the interplay of other factors. So again, rolling through this, are they fluent in English or French? Yes. What experience did our taxpayer have? He did run his own business in the case. He worked in a supervisory or managerial capacity. He wasn't a member of the corporate board of directors, but he did own, operate, and control a business. Was he suffering from a medically diagnosed condition at the time? No, he was not. At least that's not what appeared in the case. Did he prepare his own tax return? Yes, he did not use an accountant. One interesting thing to note is that if you're iffy on any of these questions, you can just hover over the tooltip. That'll tell you how our legal team was thinking about it when they drafted the question. We'll often give you examples of yes or no answers to that question as well. 2.2, somebody other than, no, he did not use a tax preparer. So we're almost through here. This was a shareholder benefit. That was the misrepresentation here. It was $51,000 around, and his taxable income at the time was $100K. So a significant amount of taxable income left out by the taxpayer. Something to consider as we're continuing through this. Is the misrepresentation something that's new to this year's tax return? E.g. that's not included in the taxpayer's return for the previous year? No, it's not. Did the taxable income in the tax return deviate significantly from the taxable income in the previous year's return? No. Were there significant changes to the taxpayer's return compared with the previous year? No. Everything was the same. It's just this This shareholder benefit was kind of omitted. Did the tax return contain other correct items of income, losses, deductions, or tax credits of the same type? No, everything else was fine. To what extent did the taxpayer review the return prior to signing it? So I could see this 3.8. I'm actually going to write this question down. I could see this being particularly controversial as a question. So how much did they actually review the decision? You might look at that and say, well, how can I, we of course want to say that they carefully reviewed it. How can I really know that? Again, this is a tool that you want to scenario test. So this is, we're imagining that the court finds that he carefully reviewed his return in this scenario. But maybe we want to go back and say, he only did a cursory review. That's what the court's going to find ultimately. And we want to test both and see how much of an impact that has. So I've written that one down. This is under the ITA, not the ETA. Did the taxpayer express concern or make any inquiries about the misrepresentation to another party? No. They didn't seek any professional advice, and they didn't go to the CRA about whether they should do anything about this, so no to everything. Does the tax return accurately reflect all the records received by the taxpayer over the course of the year? So no, it doesn't. It's missing that shareholder benefit specifically. So that's everything in there. So now I'm just going to hit the compute button, and the program's going to automatically compare all of these answers to every decision on this issue. So let's go through. Okay, so we've got, he's really out of luck, and this is what the tax court ended up finding too, 90% attributable to neglect or carelessness. So not looking good for our taxpayer client. But the really important thing here is that we're not just getting a result and then confidence level and then nothing else to help us. We're actually getting a detailed explanation as to why. So it's going to go through here. It's going to cite some of the leading authorities. So Benet's there. But it's actually going to tell us specifically what some of the strongest factors were. This is because I'm more sophisticated. So let's just look at this. In this case of education, again, this is what the court said. The algorithm's fighting this. High level of education matters. Perform due diligence. Even though carefully reviewed the return, that might have actually hurt them in this case. They didn't actually do any other inquiries to see if there was a problem with not including that shareholder benefit. Okay, so we'll go back and test out a few other scenarios, but first I want to show you another aspect of the program. So we've got all the similar cases. These cases are pulled out purely on a factual basis, so you can see there are cases that widely range in date. These aren't necessarily going to be the most authoritative cases. Those are below, so these are the references. Those are the leading authorities. These are the ones that you spend a bunch of time searching for, saying, I need cases that are just like my clients, because those are going to be really persuasive. These are just purely similar based on the facts. So again, we can see number one here is the actual case, so the 2018 case. It's number one for a reason. It's the most similar. Going down, it's again not looking good for our client. Every single case, this is the outcome in all of them, was negligent. I can look through a bunch of the similar factors here. So these are all the most similar things about the case, going through all the way. And then I can look at all the different references as well. So those are the leading authorities in the case. And I can toggle this as well. So give me the most, let's just look at the most similar where there's not negligent. So I'm going to care about these cases that are also pretty factually similar. They're not identified from the algorithm immediately. But again, if I'm representing this client, I care about the cases that went the other way. I'm going to toggle this differently. And I'll show you a little bit more about how to do research after. First, I'm going to download the report of this. So this is what we've just done our initial scenario tests, imagining this was our client going through here. We've got our explanation of the result, the data methodology. We've got all the similar cases. So these are hyperlinked. They go straight to TaxNet Pro, so you can just go read them there. If you don't have a TaxNet Pro subscription, it's no problem. You can just highlight. We've used the neutral citation wherever available, so you can just quickly highlight that, punch it into whatever you're using, even if it's Candly, and pull up the case. Specific questions. This is what's really important. So I've got my percentage and I've got my prediction, but ultimately I have to know that that prediction is only for this specific set of facts. So almost never are you going to use product and go through and just you have your answer at the end. There's almost always 2 or 3 questions that you need to go back and scenario test, download the reports for those, and then really cover all your bases before you give the advice to your client. So I'm going to go back now that we've done that and test out a few other things to see how much effect they have. So I think we had talked about how much review. So imagining now, instead of carefully reviewing, we didn't even review it at all. Might have some sense of whether that would help or hurt his case, but we're specifically going to check that out and see what effect it has. So instead of carefully reviewing the tax return, we're in arguments over whether he looked at it. I can imagine this is a very common argument that comes up in these cases. So people are somewhat incentivized to say that they looked at it very carefully. The other side is incentivized to say, look, this person clearly didn't look over it nearly as carefully as they're saying. So let's see in the not at all universe how things go. Yeah, it's much worse. Not necessarily, so I mean increase 5%, but it's interesting to note that the algorithms are 95% plus is the highest possible prediction that we give. So now, and honestly, coming from the data science team, if it's saying 95% plus, it's probably somewhere near 100. So very likely in that case that it's going to be negligent. Let's imagine something a little bit different that might be interesting. So let's give him very low education and no business experience. So this was something that the court actually flagged as being one of the most important factors. So this, I mean, if we just go based on the court's words, should probably be enough to sway the decision because it was so important, right? So we're taking away that university degree, we're taking away all of his business experience. The court actually itself flagged that as being one of the more important, if not the most important factor. So theoretically, if we take away all that, just according to this judge's written decision, it should be enough to actually switch things over. But we can run, because we have access to this, we can run the data against all the cases and see whether it matters as much as this court is saying it does. And it turns out that it doesn't. It's not that it doesn't reduce things, so it certainly makes it a little bit less likely, but it's not on its own the strongest factor here. And it's important to note that. This is really one of the primary use cases of this tool. Judges can say all the time what the most important factors were to them, and they do this usually ex post, right? So judges will often have a decision in their mind and kind of write a decision that goes in line with that, citing a few of the most relevant cases and kind of getting to that ultimately. But humans are kind of bad at explaining why they get to particular decisions. So that's actually not the most important factor here, at least as flagged by the algorithm. So again, I'm going to bring all this stuff back. I think if it's new to this year's tax return, I wonder, and it deviates significantly. I'm just going to go through here. Let's imagine that they made a bunch of inquiries. So they asked a professional and they asked another party. Did the taxpayer receive any indication? So they asked somebody and they got misled a little bit. They asked a professional and the professional was like, this is okay, go ahead and include this. How does that end up going? Yeah, it's enough. That's enough on its own to flip the result. That's enough, which is interesting. Okay, so I'm going to change these back. Again, we want to keep everything equal, and what I should be doing as well is downloading the reports there to make sure that I've covered all my bases when I'm doing this. Okay, what else do we want to test? So I'm just going to recompute here. There are a couple things that are going to be flagged specifically by the algorithm as things that we should test. So what if the income deviated significantly? So what if this year was really different? So again, our baseline is 90% based on what we think is going to happen. But what if the income deviated significantly from past returns? Yeah, it actually makes no difference. Makes no difference in this case. So I mean, any time that you would have spent on that wasted, essentially, as the algorithm flags it. Okay, so I think we've done enough scenario testing. If anybody wants me to test something else out, you can put that in the questions. I'll come back to it. But I want to show you some of the other aspects of the program as well. So we started there. We started with the classifier. That was kind of our initial part. We want to go into Case Finder. We want to do some research. So it's not looking great, but I still want to find for my client all the cases that are not attributable to neglect or carelessness. So I'm going to flag this as more relevant. You can see that this is highlighted, so I'm just going to get cases where it's not negligent as the result. Highest level of education, university degree, fluency in English or French, fluent. So again, I'm going to go through here and get really granular until there's no cases that match perfectly. So you can see as I'm doing this, our case finder is going through and flagging immediately the top cases that are perfect. So these are perfect matches exactly to what the parameters that we've set. So something to note that this will probably get smaller and smaller as I kind of go here. So now we're already out of cases that are perfect matches. We're getting cases that are slightly good matches. So we can go through here. I'm probably going to care a lot about this case, but important to note that we've lost that. So there's no great cases for us right off the bat. Something that is also helpful, so that was a 50K misrepresentation. So just give me all the ones between 20 and 100K. To do this now, you would have to use keywords which aren't going to be great, especially at finding dollar amounts. So you're going to spend a lot of time going through this slowly and kind of painfully. So we've got this perfect case now. I know that it's about the $86,000 range, so not totally off. Quebec case, I'm probably going to read this one immediately. And then with those exact same parameters, I can switch back to the other side. And I see right away kind of where things stand because there are 6 perfects on this side. I have to look at these cases because they're so applicable. And I have to know what I'm likely up against if we're to go to court. So again, we're going to see Melicon right there, super high up. And you can save this, keep it for later. You can download the case list just so you can use it as you go. One of the most important things here is just knowing that I've canvassed the entire universe of cases. So we have every single 152 sub 4 case in here. I know that I'm not missing anything when I do this. And if we take examples, like we just might end up using the wrong keyword and we might miss cases. There's no real strong examples here. But let's imagine that we were searching, what we cared about was theft being involved, and the judge used the term stealing. By using a keyword, you miss that case because it doesn't use the exact same word you specified. Our lawyers, having read through every single case, would still classify it that way. So I know that the person is educated, even if the language in the decision is not the exact same. So it helps you canvass things much better. We had to use the traditional methods to build this. So it's much faster, and also you know that you're not missing anything right from the hop. The other aspect is just being able to know that there aren't any cases. So people spend days sometimes trying to find cases that don't actually exist, and you can just quickly roll through here, and then if no cases fit the parameters, then you know you're not going to spend a bunch of time on that trying to find a case that's not helpful. So I might click through here to this number 1 match. It's going to bring me to TaxNet Pro. I'm going to click through, and then I'm just going to start reading it immediately. If I care about any really specific keywords that aren't covered there, then I'm just going to go through that. Okay. So we're starting to run a little bit low at about the 250 mark or so. I'm going to turn it over to questions, but there's still a couple things that I want to show that we can do in this scenario for our client. So again, going back to assessment period, so now I've showed you case finder and the classifier. I'm going to show you case analytics. So I'm wondering, how big is the universe of 152 sub 4 cases? How many are there to start with? So immediately I can get a sense of that using this. So there are 221 cases where the court has found neglect or carelessness or negligence, and then there are 51 cases that have went the other way where the court has found non-negligence. So pretty heavy towards negligence if it goes to court, just as a side note right away. But I know that there's a universe of about 270 cases here, so something helpful for me to know. Case analytics helps visualize that data across all these different factors. So maybe I don't have enough information to go through an entire classifier. Maybe I don't have, I just really want to figure out the interplay of certain things and how, just by, it's not by machine learning, but just purely by the analytics, how those things tend to break down. So just, I mean, if I have a reassessment period case and I'm going to the Tax Court of Canada, what are my chances? Just by the raw analytics, it's likely to be negligent, non-negligent. So you can see the percentages there, significant. How about if I go before the Federal Court of Appeal? Does that change very much? No, it actually gets a little bit worse. And then Supreme Court of Canada, there have been no cases. This is interesting. We can actually look, and we can look at time trends too. So from 2000, let's just say from 2000 to 2000 to 2010, how did cases tend to go? See if there's been differences in the time trends. So again, 27 to 76% of them come out negligent. I wonder if things have gotten more lenient or less lenient over time. So we'll go and test out 2010 to 2018. And it turns out it's actually been a bit less. So over time, it just tends to be a higher percentage. And again, I can do this with any type of fact that I care about. So if you have, I mean, it just makes sense that people that have postgraduate degrees are probably more likely to be negligent. So pretty high rate there, so 81%, and those with less than high school, actually no. So it's not as obvious as it would be. Dollar amounts. So like how have courts been treating dollar amounts just on a raw basis? So we'll imagine 20,000 to 40,000. Left out pretty high percentage, 91. And then let's go to the really high cases, so 100,000 to 200,000, or maybe even broader than that to 1 million. Yeah, it actually reduces a little bit. So it's not going to be perfectly accurate in doing this, but you see the point of it is to really just be able to get a sense of how those cases go, particularly by factor. So Excise Tax Act cases versus Income Tax Act cases. So way more cases, not surprisingly, under the Income Tax Act than the Excise Tax Act. But those are just here for you if you care about that to go through, where the tax return accurately reflected all the records. 47 to 33, so 80 cases there, really close. Gets really obvious if it didn't reflect all the records received by the taxpayer over the course of the year. So that's actually something we could have gone back and tested. This is really powerful because there's so many cases that have involved in it. It's such a high rate of negligent to non-negligent. I can't imagine the algorithm doesn't take that heavily into consideration. So that's something we've kind of just found out here that would be interesting to play with if we went back. Again, so if I care specifically, like let's take our case that we're working through together. I'm going to say university degree, and it's not like I can't do this for many different factors, right? So I'm going to do this for this, university degree, owned, operate, and control the business. I can see right away it's not looking great. Like even just by the raw analytics, it's not looking great. It's 100% here, but 90% as the algorithms flagged it. Not use a tax preparer. I'm going to get rid of this business experience. But yeah, as we go through these factors, it looks like our client is in trouble. And again, you can get as granular as you want with this. That is, those are the main functions when it comes to that. Some other functions that are available too are things like being able to download the questionnaire. So I'll quickly show that, as well as primers. I'm not going to go through every feature of the program. If you're interested in that, please do reach out. I'll show a slide in just a few minutes in terms of how you can reach out to us. Happy to have one of our lawyers give you guys a demo and show you the product if you want to run some specific things. Okay, so this will become fillable at some point. This just allows me to get all of the questions from the particular classifier into my hands. Particularly helpful if you're doing client intake. These are the most important questions to have answers to. So you want to make sure you have answers right from the get-go. Your client comes in, you can go through all of these, tick these off, and roll through it. So that is available here. The other aspect too are primers. So primers just give you an overview of the area of law. These may or may not be interesting to you depending on how often you practice in the area. But because we've done all this work doing running the data against all of these different issues, you can actually go through and find out, how much does sophistication of the taxpayer matter just based on our own internal studies or characteristics, how much these tend to matter, and they all have the citations going down, as well as references to recent or important cases. So these can be really valuable to have access to because we're the only ones that have those insights, at least for now, going through here. Okay. So I see that we're running a little bit low on time. I'm going to go through, again, just the different issues that we cover, and then I'm going to show you how to contact us. And then please start typing in your questions now because I'll start answering them for the last 10 minutes or so of our webinar today. So again, income capital issues, sources of income. Income capital tends to be used more by our accounting firm clients. Real estate used a lot, just by everybody, including law firms. Worker used by both, probably more so by law firms. Inclusions, again, used by everybody. Deductions. CCA is super helpful, but really specified, so not many practices deal with it. Can offer, obviously, a ton of help if you do deal with it. Jurisdictional issues kind of used by everybody. Accounting for, everybody deals with residency a lot. On the corporation basis, jurisdictional issues helpful too. Penalties tend to be more law firms than accounting firms, not to say that accounting firms don't run into these issues, specifically the assessment period issue. If there's one that accounting firms run a fair bit, it's assessment periods. GAR, everybody's impacted by, and we have Case Finder and Case Analytics for that specifically. Elections is more so accounting firms, and indirect tax is used a bit by both. Again, most people that are in indirect tax tend to specialize, so this is kind of like a specialist area. Okay. So I'm going to run through, I'm going to reduce this quickly and go back to the slide. So I'm just going to share this again. Okay, and I see that the questions are already starting to roll in. So I just want to put this up here quickly now as I start to run through these different questions. So if you're interested to get a walk through this program, I know this was on a specific case that we had run through together, 152 sub 4. If you're interested in delving a little bit further, you have an income or capital issue or a residency issue, and you want to walk through that with one of our lawyers, please do send a text to this number. We'll be happy to set you guys up with that. We've got a full team here that's super responsive, so we're happy to get you guys rolling with that as well. And I can put this up again at the end. I'm just going to again go back to the product and then answer some questions. Okay, so I'm going to answer the first question. What is the cost, and do you provide help if we have questions about the software? Great question. I can't tell you right off the top what the exact cost is because it's purely based on the amount of practitioners in the firm. I can't say it's significantly cheaper, obviously, if you're a sole practitioner because there's only going to be one person using it, than if you're a 50-person or 100-person firm. It's by the size of the firm. And so, I mean, it's much more affordable for those who would run into the issues less, which would be those with smaller practices, not surprising. But if you want a quote, you can reach out using that number. So I'll put that up again. Happy to work with you and find out the specifics of your firm, and then we can give you a quote. The second part of this question, if we have questions about the software, do we provide help? Yes. So there are a number of different ways to get help. We have this live chat button here. There's somebody monitoring this all the time, and so you can enter whatever question you have. Somebody will get back to you almost immediately. I didn't spend much time on it, but after running through the classifier, there's a feedback button, and we take feedback extremely seriously. So if you disagree with something and you write feedback that's cogent, then we'll get back to you probably that day with a lawyer to talk to you about it. If there's something that's wrong with the product, we need to know immediately. And so we take that feedback very seriously. Somebody will help you. Also, part of purchasing the product is we do have a customer success team that spends a significant amount of time working through any problems and training people. I've just shown kind of a cursory review of the product, but showing you how to attach things to bills, how to save things properly, attach things to file numbers. All that stuff is included in the price. So please do reach out to us. Happy to work with you on that. Another question. is the client's data safe when entered into filters? So we spend a lot of time making sure that there's no personally identifiable information. This is certainly safe for law firms and the big accounting firms to use. We've been through some of the most arduous security audits. You can imagine the big accounting firms obviously have significant security audits when it comes to their clients. So yes, there's just thinking about that example that we ran through, there's no identifiable information about your client, so it can't be tagged to anybody. It's not discoverable in that way, although that's not legal advice, but running through the different types of classifications, you're running scenarios that are factually based. It doesn't have to be attached to a client, and there's no personally identifiable information attached to that specifically. Another question, okay, there's more questions pouring in. So the question is, how does the algorithm deal with old cases versus new cases? So that's a great question. How does it take into account the time trend? So you could see, when I was looking through a lot of those cases, there were some ones from the 80s, some older ones there. How does the algorithm know that newer cases should be more important? It does this because we've asked it to give a prediction on the back end specifically for 2018. So we actually could ask the algorithm to give us a prediction for 1994 or 1992, and it would give us that. But because it's asked to give us the prediction for today, it knows to weight newer cases as more important going forward. So it automatically looks at those cases as being more important and weights them accordingly. Another aspect of that too is just, so people often follow that question up with, how does it deal with the Federal Court of Appeal or the Supreme Court of Canada cases? Because those ones are really important. It's not just treating those the same as some of the lower court decisions, is it? And so the answer to that is a bit more nuanced. So we train the algorithm specifically on the higher court decision if it overturns the lower court decision, so it never sees that lower court decision. And the other way that it takes those differences of the level of court into account is just through trends in the case law. So if we imagine that there's an appellate level decision that purports to say, this factor, so that decision that we just went through. So education and business experience is the most important. To the extent other courts actually follow that in the same way, it's going to be reflected in the cases, and the algorithm is going to effectively take that case as being more important. I see that there are just a few more minutes here, so please do feel free to ask any other questions, and then we're gonna stop. One other thing as well to keep in mind is that we have these webinars every single month, so Ben will be back for next month's on a different topic. If you have suggestions about something that would be cool for us to explore, please do reach out. Again, I'll show that slide of how to do that toward the end. Okay, there's a question about how do we make sure that cases are entered properly. So I think this is probably about the sanctity of our data. How do we make sure that all the cases have been coded properly? Well, we have a full legal team, but we don't stop there. We also make sure that we have multiple people looking at the same cases, so there's no incorrect judgment calls made. Super important for us to be accurate when it comes to entering this data, because having inaccurate data just leads to bad results or results that wouldn't be accurate as to our standards. So going through all the different aspects of it, we have a full 12 lawyers, lots of law students, multiple people coding the same case, so multiple people structuring that case the same way when it's entered into the system, so we know we aren't losing out on anything ultimately as we go through. I think I've got probably time for one or two more questions, and then we'll end things off, but thanks so much for joining. I'm just going to wait a minute for another question. Okay. How quickly are new decisions entered? So that is a really good question. Again, it's important for us to be up to date, and I think I'll probably take this question, then go to the slide, and then we'll end things. Within a week of them appearing on TaxNet Pro, so one of the benefits of us working with Thomson Reuters is that we have access to TaxNet Pro. We know when new decisions come out. That's somebody's job at our place is to constantly monitor these areas, make sure we don't miss anything. So within a week of it being available on TaxNet Pro, it's going to be structured. So lawyers are going to read it, code it accordingly, make sure it's uploaded into the system with no problems ultimately at the end. So it's going to be in there super quick. It tends to be, so I can actually show quickly. So if I look at some of my saved classifications, these will be updated as new cases come down. So if a new case, changes the outcome or changes the confidence level, this will be updated automatically. You might think, well, what if it changes it significantly? Because we have the full body of cases already in the system, so hundreds and hundreds of them, one doesn't tend to turn the dial that much. Many over the years probably would, but these don't significantly change just from one case, unless it's the Supreme Court of Canada case that purports to change the law, in which case we would go back and change the classifier to reflect that. So new cases come down, they're entered into the system immediately for research purposes, and for the algorithm just tends to be that you don't necessarily need to worry about it totally changing the legal area. All right, so 2 minutes. I'm going to go back to the slide, and then we're going to end things. Again, if you have questions, further questions that you want to go through, if you're interested in having us walk through this program with you, please send a text to 416-564-4696 now. We'll loop you in with our legal team. We'll get everything rolling, and you're good to go in terms of having that walkthrough done. I just want to thank everybody for attending. This has been great. I think I'm going to end things now. So thanks so much for coming, attending, and watching this. Again, feel free to text or reach out through our website. Be happy to get back to you and answer any other further questions that you have. So thanks everybody, and have a good rest of your Wednesday.